All right, here we go. Okay, so in 1250 BC, there's going to be a test after this, so everybody be making sure you know all these dates. No, there's no test. But I know we're going to learn from seeing things on a timeline. It can help us visualize it. In 1250 BC, this is when the nation of Israel has been led out of Egypt. This is after they've left Mount Sinai. They are wandering in the wilderness. They have lost their faithfulness in God. Therefore, God judges them and says, this generation will not enter the land of Canaan. They will die in the wilderness, and the next generation will inherit the promised land. This happens in 1250 BC. So this is the original event that is being focused on in the book of Hebrews, is the event of Moses leading people in the wilderness in 1250. David is writing to his people in 950 BC. So this is 300 years later. David is writing to his followers, the nation of Israel at this time, and he is writing to them and he is warning them, we must listen to the Lord. If we fail to listen to the Lord, we will be like the nation of Israel in 1250 BC, and we will be punished and we will not be allowed to enter into the land of rest. The Hebrew writer now, some 900 and something years later, almost 1,000 years later, the Hebrew writer quotes David, is capturing the thought of David that we must be warned, that there is a warning. That is what the passage there in Psalm 95 is. It is a warning that we must listen to the Lord. And then here we are. In class tonight. So this is just a way for you to maybe visualize it a little bit. We are reading in the book of Hebrews, but the book of Hebrews is pointing to the book of Psalms, and the book of Psalms is pointing to an event that happens in the book of Exodus. So there you go. Now we can finally get into Hebrews chapter 4. We need to do that background because in Hebrews chapter 4, the Psalm 95 that is in Hebrews chapter 3 is quoted several times. So now we enter into Hebrews chapter 4 and we're talking about the land of rest. I know I may be making it more complicated than it is, but my goal is just for us to try to understand this together. Hebrews chapter 4, beginning in verse 1. The Hebrew writer again is capturing the idea of warning. We all must be warned that if we don't listen to the word of the Lord, there will be consequences. So he talks about the people in the wilderness. He uses David's thoughts from Psalm 95. And then we have the word therefore. So because of all that, therefore, while the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us fear, lest any of you should seem to have failed to reach it. For good news came to us just as to them. But the message they heard did not benefit them because they were not united by faith with those who listened. So the Hebrew writer says, we've all heard the good news. We have heard the good news, but we can't be like the people of the past who failed to reach the promised land because they failed to have faith in the good news that was delivered to them. All right? There's not many people in the United States of America who are not somewhat familiar with the good news, who are not familiar with the good news of Jesus Christ. But just because they have heard the good news of Jesus Christ and what he's done does not necessarily mean that they believe it or that they've oriented their life around it. And the warning that is being repeated through the book of Hebrews is if you do not yield to Jesus, if you do not understand the good news and have faith in the good news, then you're going to miss out on the promised land. That there is consequences for those who fail to have faith in the good news that is presented to them. So that is something to be fearful of. Let us fear. Let us fear. Fear is such a strong emotion. And fear is, especially within the Christian context, can be a little bit of a complicated emotion. We should have a fear. Christians should have a fear of the Lord. It is not a fear that drives us to cower, but it is a fear that drives us to certain types of living, and that's what we're going to get through as we go through the passage here. Is how this fear of missing out on the land of promise and the land of ultimate rest should drive us to live certain ways. So let us fear, lest any of you should seem to have failed to reach it. For good news came to us just as to them, but the message they heard did not benefit them because they were not united by faith with those who listened. Verse 3, for we who have believed enter that rest, as he said. And this is the quotation from Psalm 95, which he's already quoted there in Hebrews chapter 3. So anytime that I've got the words that are italicized, this is the quote from Psalm 95. Okay, so we who have believed enter that rest, as he has said, as I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest, although his works were finished from the foundation of the world. I wanted to teach on this, but I'm already running out of time. So I'm going to wrap this teaching up in something I'm going to do later on. Okay. For we who have believed enter that rest. If you believe, if you have real faith, if you orient your life around that you believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God, you have entered into that rest. It's not something that, it is both something that you will do and are doing. The rest that we receive from God is a now and a future thing. It has its ultimate culmination in the great beyond, right? In heaven, in the eternal presence of God. But it is something that we can benefit from now. So we who have believed, we've entered into that rest. There's already rest that we are tied to. And now it's going to get interesting. It's going to show us whose rest it is. Verse 4. For he has somewhere spoken of the seventh day in this way. And once again, I just remind you that the Hebrew writer is just quoting and is not giving us an exact reference. And this is, as I've said before, this is some peace for me as a teacher, because the Hebrew writer is like, hey, somewhere in the Bible this is said. Okay, and I appreciate that, because there's many times that I want to be like, you know what, this is somewhere, but I can't remember where. That's basically what the Hebrew writer is saying. For he has somewhere spoken of the seventh day in this way. And God rested on the seventh day from all his works. That's Genesis 2:2. And God rested on the seventh day from all his works. And again, in this passage, quoting in Psalm 95, they shall not enter my rest. Whose rest is it? It's God's rest. It's God's rest. It's God's rest because it's a gift that he's given. So it's not something we've necessarily earned. It's something he's given. It's God's rest because he has shown us what it is to rest, and he is the first of the resters, and God rested on the seventh day from all his works. It's God's rest because it's a type of rest that only he can give. It has the satisfaction that can only come from God or from the divine that he is. So it is his rest. All right, finally, I have some discussion questions for us. So it's twice here pointed in Hebrews 4:3 and now in Hebrews 4:4 that God rested. What does it mean that God rested? What does it mean that God rested? We know that when God created the heavens and the earth, and on day 7 it said that he rested. You know, and God, if he's God, he's all powerful. He's not a being that gets tired. So what does it mean that God rested? He paused? Is that what he said? He paused? Anybody else?
His work was done.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I paused at your pause, Mike, because it wasn't really a pause; it was a completion. God rested because he was done. He was done. What else does it mean? God rested. Yeah, he was at peace with what he had done. He was satisfied with his work. He looked at it and said it was good. Philip? Yeah, because he did what he did create again.
Sometime later.
Yeah, sometime later. We don't exactly know when. That's right. Anybody else? God rested?
Justin, I don't think God needs rest.
Right, yeah.
God's on duty 24/7, 365, and then he's out in the future and he's in the past and everywhere else. He doesn't need rest. But I think part of it was he was giving us an example.
Yeah, I think...
And a day to come together with him.
Yeah, I think you're right. Jim brings up that part of it. Well, first off, he brings up the point God doesn't need rest because he's God. But he brings up that part of God resting has to do with instruction. And God was giving us an example of how humans need rest, of how we need to rest from work. And our rest from work, it's been a while since I've taught on the Sabbath, or preached on the Sabbath. I remember doing it a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. We need rest, but we need rest within the context of how God rested, which is that God was satisfied with what he had done, with the work that he had done. So it's not just that we rest and we take a break, but it is the mindset that we have when we take a break. And when we remove ourselves from our work, it's not that I sit down and now I'm thinking about all the things that I could be doing if I was working. That's not real rest. But it is I take a rest because I am satisfied with the work that I've done. And I do think that's important. Anybody else, what does it mean that God rested? Yeah, all right, took time to admire. And I do think that's another thing that's good for instructional for us, is we should take time to admire our work as well. You know, we have those words from God when he created things. He said that it was good. And he had that when he rested because it was good. He admired what he had done, and we should have that too with our work, that we should be able to step back and admire it and appreciate the work that we've put into something. So that's good. What does it mean that believers enter God's rest? Because that's what it talks about here, is how believers enter God's rest. What's it talking about here? Yes. All right. Philip says our guarantee of a place in heaven. This is primarily speaking, I believe this is primarily, the whole thing is primarily speaking about heaven. And the promised land that we have, the Canaan that we have, which is not a physical place here on earth, but is the eternal place of rest. So heaven. Yeah, I do think that is the primary way that this chapter is, and there's people who disagree with that, who think it's primarily talking about just the general rest that we have in Christian living. But I think it's primarily talking about heaven. But yeah, so believers have a guarantee if we are faithful, if we respond to the warning that is given to us here, and we live faithfully in view of God's will and his word, then we are people who enter into God's rest. Anybody else, what does it mean that believers enter God's rest? Yeah, we're at peace. I do think, well, I do believe it's primarily about heaven and the destination that Christians are heading to, because that's the correlation that's happening through this chapter, is that there is a destination that we are journeying to, and you have to be faithful to get to that. I do think there is still within the text the peace that comes with Christian living, and the rest that comes in faithfulness to God that we experience here in this earth. We do. Christians, we should have a peace about life that the world cannot understand. Really, we should have a peace about life that we don't understand. That's what Philippians chapter 4 tells us, right? The peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. So yeah, there is an incredible amount of peace that we should have, which is a form of rest. Anybody else? What does it mean that believers enter God's rest?
Well, we finish the race as we, if we do this, as we grow as Christians and we participate in those kinds of things, when we get to it's got to be a great relief for us.
Yeah.
As Christians, that hey, look, I fought hard,
Mm-hmm.
finished the race. This is what God has promised us.
Yeah. And so he talks about finishing the race and being able to look back and say, I've fought hard and now I get to enjoy the things that God has promised. And that's exactly right. And that's some of what's going to be depicted for us here as we go through. So that's exactly right. And it talks in a moment. Yes, it'll talk in a moment in verse 10. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works as God did from his. And we'll get to that in a second. But so yes, as we run the race of life, if we think about what it takes to run the race of life as a Christian, there are certain things that we try to do that might seem burdensome or difficult at times, but there is a destination, a finish line where we get to enjoy not having those burdens or difficulties anymore, and we can look back in appreciation of, man, this was difficult, but now look where I'm at now. I am enjoying what God has given me to enjoy, and part of that enjoyment is knowing I don't have to do the burden and the difficulties anymore. Those things are behind me. Let's continue on. Verses 6 and 7. Since therefore it remains for some to enter it, and those who formerly received the good news failed to enter because of disobedience, again he appoints a certain day. And this is a quotation from Psalm 95. Today, saying through David so long afterward, in words already quoted, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. Two things just about this real quick. The point that the Hebrew writer is making is that the land of rest is not only bound to the physical land of Canaan. So that's the point he's making. The land of rest is not only bound to the physical land of Canaan. So he's making that point by saying, if you think about the timeline again, if the physical land of Canaan was the only place of rest, then why would David 300 years later reference that rest and say today? So he's pointing out that the promise for rest is not solely for the physical land of Canaan, for the first or second generation of Moses' followers, but that is an eternal rest for those who hear the voice of the Lord. But notice in the warning what he is, the things that he is warning will keep you from the land of rest. And it's disobedience. Since therefore it remains for some to enter it, and those who formerly received the good news failed to enter because of disobedience. Moses and his followers missed out on the land of Canaan because of their disobedience. So that's still a principle that applies today. People who miss out on God's eternal rest, the ultimate destination of heaven, miss out because of their disobedience, which means those who enter into the land of rest, they are included in that because of the opposite. Obedience. That doesn't diminish the work of Christ. That doesn't mean that your obedience earned you the work of Christ. But it does show that God has always been in partnership with his people. That his people have always had a role to play in their own salvation. And that role is faithfulness and obedience is what is being repeated throughout this. If that wasn't the case, then the Hebrew writer would not be writing so much here about warning. Hey, you have to listen. Hey, you have to obey. Hey, you have to have faith. Otherwise, you will miss out. All right, finishing up here, verses 8 through 10. For if Joshua had given them rest, All right, first off, did Joshua give them rest? He didn't, okay. But he did give them, where did Joshua lead them into? The land of Canaan. He led them into the promised land. And this is just an interesting thing, but I think I've already talked about this in the PM class. I can't remember for sure, but the name Jesus is the same name as Joshua. Jesus' name in Hebrew is Joshua. So it was selected for Joshua to be the one who follows Moses and actually leads the Israelites into the promised land. Well, now Jesus has established the new covenant, the new law. In a sense, he is following the law of Moses, and he, like the previous Joshua, is leading his people into the eternal land of promise. So Jesus is the better Moses. He's also the better Joshua, because he leads his people into the eternal promised land, the ultimate rest. Verse 8, for if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken of another day later on. So again, the Hebrew writer is making the point that the land of rest, the promised land, is a continual thing. It was not just for Moses and his followers. For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken of another day later on. So then, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works, as God did from his. So he makes the point that rest remains open for anybody who is qualified as the people of God. There remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works, as God did from his. Verse 11. Here's the big sticking point. Okay, he's been talking about the warning and the journey and everything. So he sums up here in verse 11. Let us therefore, because of all this stuff, here's the big point. Because of all this, let us strive to enter that rest, so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience. Let us strive to enter that rest. So he puts the goal in that there is a destination, there is a place of rest. It does take striving to stay faithful, to enter that rest. And again, he tells you, this is what will keep you out of the land of rest, which is disobedience. That's a repeated theme here in Hebrews 4. All right, what does it look like to strive to enter that rest? What does striving look like? Yeah, obedience. It's an obvious theme here in Hebrews chapter 4, is that there is an obedience factor when it comes to entering into the land of rest or being faithful to the Lord. Is obedience, which is our ability to submit to the Lord and to his will, and to live according to those instead of according to our own will. What else maybe does it look like to strive to enter that rest? Yeah, effort. Yeah, effort. There is effort. When we think about the Christian walk, there is effort in the Christian walk. In the Christian walk is not something that is easy necessarily. I think maybe we'll get to that in a second. But there is effort. It's God and again, you have to remember the picture that the Hebrew writer is using all throughout this chapter. And he is comparing what it is that Christians go through with the journey from Sinai to the Promised Land. Okay, and in the journey from Sinai to the Promised Land, even before the rebellion, God was there trying to provide. They still had to walk the journey. They just had to walk it in faith that God was going to provide. And the faithfulness, the lack of obedience came from they doubted. They had seen everything wonderful that God had done, from parting the Red Sea to providing for them food and water in a desert and in a wilderness, and still they repeatedly doubted. So when we think about what our walk is, it is something of effort. We are on a journey. We're on a journey to the promised land. And just like the Israelites, there are difficulties on that journey. But we are called, like the Israelites, to remember that our God is a faithful God, and to remember that our God provides for His people. He doesn't pick them up and carry them to the promised land, but He does provide for them in the moment what it is that they really need underneath His prerogative of a good Father. So it does take effort, and the Christian walk is going to be a walk that is filled with effort and difficulty, but is also a walk tied to knowing who sustains us in the difficulty. Jared?
To go along with that, and maybe take a step farther, to me, strive kind of implies that it's going to be a struggle.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I think you're right. That strive does seem to imply that there is a struggle. And I would agree with that. When we think about taking up your cross, Jesus encourages us to take up our cross, and that is obviously supposed to be a difficult task. But it's one that we are, while it does have its difficulties, it is one that when we are abiding with the Lord, we are empowered to do that. David?
Courageous, bold.
Or Daniel? Yeah. Sorry, what?
Courageous and boldness.
Yeah. I think you're. Yes. Yeah. Striving will entail courage and boldness. Someone over here raised their hand too.
Well, I just found it.
Yeah.
I think about, you go through life, especially get older and look back, you realize there were things that came along that could cause you to lose faith, to
Mm-hmm.
blame God, to whatever might have been a health thing or a loss, love. So part of that striving is that steadfastness,
Yeah.
to stay the course.
Yeah. Yeah. Part of the striving is the steadfastness. I think you're exactly right. And many times I think in striving, you don't necessarily know the next step. You don't necessarily always know the next step, but you know you need to take the next step. And that's sort of where faithfulness comes into play. You go through something difficult. Sometimes you wonder, I don't know what to do next. I don't know what God's plan is. And there might be even doubts in those things and doubts of God. And we know that as faithful Christians, we are all going to experience doubt at times. It's not necessarily sinful to experience doubt. But what do you do with your doubt? And I think for a lot of us who have struggled with doubt at times, we know that there is another side of that brings you closer to the Lord. But the thing that brings you closer is in the midst of doubt, are you able to take the next step, which will be a step of faith? I can imagine at different times in the wilderness, the population of Israel looked at what was in front of them and saw a desolate wasteland. And their sinfulness was, we can't do that. God is calling us to do that, but we can't do that. God is calling us to do that, but we don't think He's going to provide. That was their sinfulness. So when I think about what does it look like to strive and enter that rest, the two things from the text is about faithfulness and obedience. Faithfulness and obedience. We have to be people who are willing to take the next step, who are willing to be people who have faith that God will provide. And it's not an unfounded faith. In the wilderness, they had seen so many wonderful miracles. If you go back and read Psalm 95, the context of Psalm 95 is the first 7 verses are about the glory of God and all the things that God has done and all the ways that God has looked after man. And then in verse 8 begins that warning where David writes, don't ignore that. Don't ignore all the glorious things that God has done for man throughout time. Don't ignore that, but let that guide you to how it is that you should live and submit to God. So our faithfulness is not unfounded, because what we should be able to do is look at our past, and whether that's a historical church past, or a lot of us are able to look at our own past and to look at our past and see God's faithfulness in our past. And what that should do is inform us on what God's faithfulness is going to be in the future. And we look at His faithfulness in the past of being a good God, and we say, I'm going to be faithful to that. And even though I don't know exactly what this next step is going to entail, I'm going to take it in partnership with the Lord. That's striving, being faithful and obedient. There is difficulty, but it's, again, difficulty that is tied to, look at what the Lord has done. And I have so much confidence that He's going to keep doing it in the future. And that it has a destination, which is rest. So here's our takeaways from the passage. God's rest is available. Man, how wonderful is this? That God's rest is available for all people. And I don't have time to go through all the references, but in verses 1, 6, and 9, you can see that God's rest is available. God's rest is for the church. For the church. The church is not mentioned in this passage, but in verse 2 it does say for those who believe. And in verse 9 it does say for the people of God. That's the church. And then finally, God's rest has entry requirements, that there are requirements for entry into the rest of God. And that is obedience and faithfulness. And you cannot enter into the rest of God without obedience and faithfulness. And it's based upon our ability to be faithful and obedient is based upon what God's already done. And what God's already done points us to how it is that we can be faithful and how it is that we can be obedient and how it is that we can move forward to a place of rest. We don't have time. We're over time already. But is the Christian life full of rest? This is rest. This is what I'll say tonight. This is rest. Our ability to be together, to work out God's word together, to study together, that's its own form of rest. Our ability to rely on one another and support one another as we go through life, that is a form of rest. Our ability to commune with the Lord, either in worship or in nature, that is a form of rest. Our rest, the Christian's ability to rest is a rest that doesn't come from a silencing of all trouble, but is the ability to rest in the midst of trouble. That's what the Christian's real power is. And that's what Jesus offers people, I think. When Jesus offers, hey, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. There's a tie here also to being underneath the burden and the work of the law of Moses, and how Jesus frees us from that, and how His law is one that is a law of gentleness, that His yoke is easy, that His law is a law of love, which has a light burden. So rest is something that Christians are involved in now, and I wish I had reserved a little more time for us to talk about that here at the end of class. But thank you for being here tonight. Alan is going to teach for us next Wednesday night because I should have a baby by then. So Alan's going to teach for us next Wednesday night. You don't want to miss that. I know it's going to be wonderful. Thank you.